Good evening. My name is Erik Flesch, and I'm the director of the Mining and Rollo Jameson Museums. And welcome to this fifth of 7 presentations as part of the 2023 Winter Lyceum. Today is the 19th day of March 2023, and I'm broadcasting from Platteville, Wisconsin, home of the world's largest letter M in the heart of the hilly driftless area, and a special place known as the Upper Mississippi Valley lead and zinc mining region, where the Badger State was born. Founded in 1965 by the city of Platteville, the museum brings to life a rich cultural heritage rooted in local history, a tradition of science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, and a celebration of pioneering, which we recognize to be a living human spirit of ingenuity, inquiry, enterprise, and development. I invite you to stay up to date on museum programs and to support current initiatives online at www.mining.jameson.museum. This year's Winter Lyceum continues to be a truly electrifying series of 7 presentations on the theme of energy in the context of our driftless area landscape and current events. It's my great pleasure to welcome you this evening to enjoy a presentation by Gary Zimmer titled Biological Farming, Energy and Biological Farming, How Farmers Can Reduce Energy Use and Build Soil Carbon by Farming Differently. I'd like to thank all of you who have registered to participate live today, as well as those who may be watching a recording of this event from our library of virtual programs. Welcome to current friends of the Mining and Rollo Jameson Museum members and donors, and a big thank you to the sponsors whose financial support has made this program possible. A&W Restaurant of Platteville, Claire Bank, Edward Jones Financial Advisor Bob Hundhausen, Inspiring Community, Southwest Health, State Farm Agent Jordan Holthouse, and Tricor Insurance. And now, before we begin our program, I'd like to invite you to participate in a question and answer session and a short survey at the end of this evening's presentation. Because we're a large online group, in the interest of time, I'd like to invite you to type out your questions as they come to mind and to submit them via the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen during the talk. And at the end, our speaker will answer as many of the questions as he's able in the order in which they are received. So I'm now pleased to introduce tonight's speaker. Gary Zimmer is founder and chief visionary officer of Midwestern BioAg. Known as the father of biological agriculture, Zimmer's an internationally known author, speaker, and consultant. He owns Otter Creek Organic Farm, a family-operated award-winning 1,000-acre farm near Lone Rock. Zimmer is the author of 3 books, The Biological Farmer, The Biological Farmer, 2nd edition, and Advancing Biological Farming, plus numerous articles on soils and livestock nutrition. He earned his bachelor's degree from the UW-Madison and master's degree in dairy nutrition from the University of Hawaii. Anyone who attends a meeting featuring Gary will see that he is one of the world's leading authorities on biological farming. After several decades as a farmer, agribusinessman, educator, and author, Zimmer is recognized around the world for his dedication to improving farms by restoring soils. Please join me in welcoming Gary Zimmer.
Well, great, pleasure to be here. Anyway, I don't know if you could, we start out with the picture of my last book. So yes, we moved to the Spring Green area, Lone Rock area, Spring Green, in 1979. And I'm a dairy nutritionist, as Erik had talked about my background. And I got introduced to soils way back in the 1970s. I was teaching at a technical college in Minnesota, and I had to teach it was a small 2-year post-high program, and I had to teach soils, agronomy, farm finance, and dairy nutrition. And so I am self-taught in soils, but soils and cows are very similar. They're biological systems. They depend upon biology and different feeds and balance. And so I got introduced to soils by bringing in outside speakers into my class. And I got introduced to Brookside Laboratory Farms, and I became a Brookside consultant in Minnesota. And then I wanted to have a piece of land to do some of these trials and ideas and things I had in my head that I wanted to accomplish, or I couldn't always get farmers to do the testing I wanted to test. And so I left Minnesota, came back to Wisconsin, our home state, and settled in the Spring Green area and bought a small farm and started doing a whole bunch of these testings. And then a couple of years later, I met some folks and we started Midwestern BioAg. And so I'm now, most people think I'm a soils guy. Business in the beginning was all about dairy cows. The first 400 farms we ever started, I started them all myself, and they were small family dairy farms. And we're the company that deserves the credit to take dairy nutrition to the soils. Because until that point in my career, I had one of the students do a project. I just thought that feed was feed, and I spent 9 years at the university, and whatever feed test was there, I tested it, and what was missing, I would add something, and if it was too strong in some nutrient or something, I would dilute it down. I had no idea you could change feed, and we did some trials on putting calcium, sulfur, and boron on a hay field, and the hay changed. And this is way back in the 1970s, and I said, wow, what would ideal alfalfa for a cow look like? And so we started doing all kinds of testing on different products and different kinds of inputs. So that's kind of my background. And then I got into soils and got into consulting. So next one. So then in the early 80s, I started a company, Midwestern BioAg out of Blue Mounds. And it was what happened was when I was consulting, I would recommend things like calcium sources and different trace minerals. And see at this point in how things were really looked at, fertilizer was sold on solubility. I tell everybody, my grandfather bought a fertilizer, NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, of a 3-12-12. But see, then you say, well, that doesn't add up to 100%. Well, no, there's calcium and sulfur and trace minerals and everything else. And then my dad got to buy a 6-24-24. So fertilizer was sold on solubility and price, never on performance. And so I and my generation, they got to buy a 9-23-30, which is still available today, but grandpa probably had the best fertilizer. I don't want all the nutrients to be soluble. So then I started looking at the sources of fertilizer, and being a consultant, I couldn't get anything. And so we started Midwestern BioAg, and we started out in Illinois, and I moved up to Blue Mounds in the mid 80s or late 80s. And we started bringing in all these different ingredients and manufacturing different fertilizers. First, I wanted the fertilizer to have a lower pH instead of the soils. The second thing, I didn't want all the nutrients to be soluble, and I wanted to be more efficient with those nutrients. So nutrient use efficiency is a big topic today. So I wanted to balance the soluble to slow release. So our numbers were quite different than other fertilizer companies. So in order to go through this thing was a very radical different approach to farming, if you listen to some of the people that were my competition. And so anyway, that's why the company is based on education. I was an educator. That's why the 3 books. That's why I did a lot of trading and meetings, and I'm still doing them and traveling all over the countryside. And then the books got me whipped all over the planet. Next one. So if I called it biological farming way back in the 1980s, because I wanted the farmers to focus on biology in the soil, not just chemistry, because it's a living, live entity and organism. So if I had to redo a book today, and then the first book came out, it didn't have near as much about compost and cover crops and carbon as the second books did. And then the final book, there's a lot more, a better understanding of it, because we keep learning and understanding. If I had to write a book again, and I might not do that, it takes me 10 years, and I'm pretty well burned out from writing books. But these 2 words right here, soil health and soil fertility, if we look at what they are, and if every farmer would focus on those, see, now we got people focusing on no-tiller, focusing on this, or focusing on things. So if you get those soils healthy and mineralized, now what you're looking at is a picture of soil on my family farm. We farm it's actually up to about 1,500 acres now in a 45-mile circle. Our headquarters are right on Highway 130 north of Dodgeville there. We farm Taliesin Farm. So we go 10 miles to the west to Highland. We go 10 miles to the east to Spring Green, and we go north to Spring Green. So we farm quite a bit of land. We used to have a dairy farm, and now we're cash cropping, and we've got a very unique system of farming. See, soil should look like a chocolate cake. It should be loose and crumbly and aerated. So because you have a practice, like you say, oh, I want to go no-till. Well, that doesn't guarantee you're going to get what you're looking at. What you're going to get, what you're looking at, you got to feed the soil life. You got to create an ideal home. So biological farming became this thing. And my family farm, we don't have dairy herd anymore. We're cash croppers, but we have a very unique kind of a farming system. So all our fertilizers we want to put on with carbon, and the definition of soil fertility is getting your minerals in a carbon biological cycle. If you want to get more efficient, you see, the other thing is, if the ground is hard and tight and compacted, we'd say double your double your root system, and you can cut your water and fertilizer in half. So we got a lot of farms that are very efficient. Now, my own family farm, we no longer buy fertilizer, although I used to own a fertilizer company. We have fixed our soils, and now we just maintain their health. And so, and our farm is certified organic. We've been organic since the mid-90s. My son bought his first farm when he was 16 years old, and he owns a lot of land, and he married the farms. He never married. He's 45 years old today. And so he got really good at what he does. And as he only knows how to farm organically, we've been quite successful at that. Next one. So this statement right here from Mark Twain, it ain't what you don't know. It's what you know that ain't so. And I struggle with this one all the time. And this is one out here. So just like now, there's some new ones coming on. And I show these at my winter meetings, is that for years and years and years, we were told we had, you got to drink 8 to 10 glasses of water a day and all these kind of things. Now they're disputing it. And the other thing is they always said breakfast was the greatest meal, the best meal of the day. You better eat breakfast. That's not true anymore either. They're saying that you eat when you're hungry. And the breakfast thing was really promoted by cereal companies wanting to sell cereal and high fructose corn syrup. So now they dispute that. Well, let's go to soils. Well, no-till is one of my biggest battles I face out here. I was just back a couple of weeks ago. I spoke at the Texas No-Till Conference, and they want to change their name to the Texas Regenerative Conference. See, because no-till is a practice. Just because you stop tillage does not mean you're going to have healthy mineralized soils. I mean, now there are people that are no-till farmers that are really good at it, but there's a lot of people who really fail at it. You want to take a little drive out to Dubuque County, Iowa. They had a bunch of ice on the ground. They got a lot of rain. I have never seen such erosion in gullies. Years ago, they had to put grass waterways in. They had to put strips in their field. That's all gone. And they had a meeting there in that county, Iowa, Dubuque County, and 40 farmers showed up. They are quite concerned. Their soil health isn't there. And just because they stopped tilling doesn't mean that that's going to fix everything. So there's this whole battle about we got to be no-till, we got to be no-till, we got to be no-till. I said, no, we got to have healthy mineralized soil. So that's always one of my things, that what they know, they think they know if you go no-till, you're going to have healthy soils. Now, the dilemma with no-till is a blanket on top of the ground is extremely valuable. You got soil is not meant to be shown bare. So having a blanket on top, but you can do that without and doing some minor tillage. And then the other thing is that requires a lot of chemicals. And the other thing, if you got a lot of dairy cows or manure or make some major changes, that means everything's laying up on top. I was a few years ago out in the Chesapeake Bay area, and I spoke at a conference out there about chemicals in the Chesapeake Bay. And the question I asked was, is the Chesapeake Bay getting cleaner? The same thing I asked in Dane County Clean Lakes Alliance. And the answer is no. And I said, well, when are we going to recognize that the system we're promoting is not really working? Why don't we focus on getting things placed in the ground instead of running off the soil? So anyway, so no-till is, I'm not saying tillage with a purpose, I call it. What are you doing it for? And why are you doing it? And you're after those healthy mineralized soils. If you got big, heavy equipment, we had this really wet years and you compact, that becomes a problem. Another battle I got out here, what you know that ain't so, is I think everybody thinks phosphorus is the bad guy. Phosphorus is the good guy. And the only thing is that phosphorus is the one that's easier to measure, and phosphorus gets in our lakes and streams. How? By erosion. So wouldn't it make sense to kind of stop erosion instead of stop the use of phosphorus? If you don't stop erosion, and other things erode besides phosphorus, is that phosphorus is a triple negative charged compound that attracts really strongly to the soil. And phosphorus is what allows us as organic farmers, we have high phosphorus uptake. And the reason people say, oh, you can't do tillage, is they're worried about the tillage would destroy the mycorrhizae fungus. I don't know what everybody's depth of knowledge in agriculture, all these terms are thrown around today quite a bit. And the mycorrhizae is a fungus, and you can't plow, dig, and disc, you'll tear it up. But I like to shallow incorporate, and we run big rippers to make sure the water soaks in, because soils can't be waterlogged either. So phosphorus is the good guy, because the high levels of phosphorus, that's the Krebs cycle, adenosine triphosphate, energy in plants. It makes plants really healthy. Without phosphorus uptake, you're going to struggle to have a healthy plant. So then the other ones out there about organic, and that's where we're going to come into energy. Everybody says, organic uses up so much fuel running back and forth across the field. That's not true. I got into a conference, went to the strip till conference last year. They make more trips over the field than we do. They build the strips, they put nutrients on, they spray fungicides 3 times, they go out and scout the chemicals, and then we burn up all this fossil fuel. I will beg to challenge anybody on that. I've been sharing the economics of our farm and the number of trips we make over, and with the efficiency of equipment today. My son and one other guy are farming 1,500 acres, all certified organic, because we have a very efficient system of farming it. So just because we're organic doesn't mean we're tilling the thing to death. It doesn't mean that we're making unnecessary till plants. But our farm is radically different, as I mentioned before, because we use 1 year soil building and 1 year corn. Now, Phil's Organic Eggs is in Spring Green, and we sell them corn and we get manure from their farm. And so all the things. So I'll challenge on fuel use. And the other thing people always talk about, what is the most major fuels used in agriculture? Nitrogen production. How about the chemicals made over in Germany that are shipped to America? What about the guy that scouted your field 3 times? At the Texas No-Till Conference, the guy that spoke in front of me, he sprayed Roundup 5 times, and he told me he had no money. They're running out of water. Lubbock, Texas is out of water. Farming really is in a dilemma. There's no question about it. But I said, Roundup is a fungicide. It was patented as a killing agent and a fungicide and a herbicide. So there was some professors there, and they checked that all out. And I guess those are supposed to be true statements. But I would rather shallow incorporate. Now, chemicals aren't working like they used to. Look at the cost in making them, the cost in transporting them, the factories that run, the cost in doing the nitrogen. So being organic, I swear we don't use any more fuel than anybody else, but someone needs to check on that. And if we did use a little bit more, fuel is something that it's not near, because I don't have to get it out of a factory that makes something else. So anyway, that was my thing there on energy. So I'm going to take the next one. So then now the whole buzzword of today, what we're getting today is regeneration. I find this really enjoyable because I've been at odds with a lot of people push back quite a bit because we're first biological. What is that? We're organic. Biological is 3/4 of the farmers I've worked with in my career are not organic. They're conventional. I work with some of the largest farms on this planet. I'm going to Poland this June, working with a 200,000 acre farm that goes from Germany all the way down to Hungary. And a company from Austria now owns it. And their whole focus is going to be regenerative and biological. Now, what does that mean? Well, one definition was in one of the farm papers here in Wisconsin just 2 weeks ago. Regeneration might mean optimizing inputs. I have a lot of fun with people. They always said, "Oh, we've got the best farming system in the world. We don't need to be biological." And I said, then we might. What are we regenerating? Everything's going so perfect. Why are we regenerating? And what are we regenerating? So I think this regenerating soil health and soil structures is most people's job. Yes, there might be some other minerals involved, but what are they regenerating? And it's usually a diversity of plants and other things. So one thing for sure about this article here, there's a climate difference on regeneration. In other words, Wisconsin and Texas aren't the same. My farm is not the same as someone's farm in northern Wisconsin. So we got to make sure what we're regenerating, and there's no one set of rules that fits everybody, but there's some base concept, just like my biological farming. I have 6 rules to biological farming. I want to test and balance and check the minerals. I want to make sure you get the physical properties taken care of. I'm a real believer. I like the strip till system. And I want to make sure that we're minimizing our chemical and nitrogen input. And I want to make sure we create an ideal home and feed biology. Those are my rules to biological farming. Well, regeneration, having a cover on top of the ground. Perfect. And a cover on top of the ground doesn't mean something living in the soils all the time. Like now we plant rye in the fall after our corn is harvested. So then there's cover crops. We see corn and soybeans. What fits in this part of the country? So how are you going to reduce your costs and improve your soil and make your soils healthier and get more of the minerals? See what cover crops are doing. Regeneration for most people means tapping into the reserve of minerals that have been built up in our soil. And so, and some got tap roots, and it took me a long, long time to learn this, but the plants determine the soil life. So we got a variety of plants, we're going to have a variety of soil life, and therefore the disease and insects don't become a problem, and they bring up different minerals and they feed different biology. And so we got a biological balance. We don't have all the insect and disease problems, and our needs for all the insecticides, fungicides, pesticides, and biotechnology don't really exist. And then the other thing they was talking about was managing residues. If you got all those residues laying on top of the ground and they're not getting broken down, I like to shallow incorporate them, and yet I like having a blanket on top of the ground. The farming system that does the most damage to the soil is really growing corn silage. Corn silage is bare ground. And so the real benefit, in my opinion, of no-till is leaving that blanket. Now, shallow incorporating, I said to people, leaving all your residues laying on top of the soil is like putting the feed for your livestock on the other side of the fence. And so I want to manage those residues and have them break down. Otherwise, I build up disease and insects. And see, with corn and soybeans, they're planted in rows and they aren't big root systems on them. And they need something. They need another crop. I spoke at an environmental law and policy meeting in Washington, D.C. a couple of years ago, and they asked me what I would do to change agriculture. And I said, subsidize something besides corn and soybeans. And my second point was tax nitrogen. So if we tax cigarettes to get people to quit, why don't we tax nitrogen so people have to get really good at it? That's part of our reason for carbon problems and burning up our organic matter. Then let's make sure guys get really good at it. Put some carbon with it, side dress. There's all kinds of things we can do on that. Then my third one was really kind of fun, and everybody laughs about it when I environmental law policy. I wanted to make commercial fertilizers colored fluorescent colors, fluorescent orange, fluorescent blue, fluorescent green. So every time it rains, you can drive down the road and see whose minerals are leaving their farm. You want to change agriculture? I think it's the perfect solution. Everybody just laughs at me, but can you imagine what fun we'd have at the end of a rainstorm? People with the really good, healthy soils, the water soaks in. And that last one is carbon sequestering. And now we got to go back to where I said that it ain't, what ain't so. We were taught for all those years that we had to really, to sequester carbon, we had to put carbon back in the soil, like compost. You're looking at a pile of compost. We make that on our farm. And the reason we quit spending raw manure, we make everything into a stable form. It's either in the cover crops. This is a farm north of Spring Green we're in transition on right now. We just took it on last year. And so we're remineralizing it. We're getting biology going. All the minerals that we apply to our farm are now in that compost pile. There's chicken manure in there. There's dairy manure. There's hay manure in there. So we got this complex thing out there. So those carbons that I'm adding to the soil, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to turn into humus. The only stable carbon that we know of today that you can add to your soil is biochar. Otherwise, humates and compost, all those things will still digest further. Now, the real thing is now the new terms and talks are about this carbon sequestering. It isn't the complex plants we add, although they would contribute some. It's the liquid carbon. See, those plants that are in that field that are growing, half the photosynthetic energies, juices, amino acids, sugars are going down into soil. Maybe it's a third to a half to actually feed the soil life. And then the soil life makes the complex carbons. We don't have to add that. You want to go to the next one? This is a recent article that came out. Dr. Jerry Hatfield and Dr. Waco are from USDA Research in Ames, Iowa. And Alan Philo, Dodgeville, Wisconsin. He used to work for me for a number of years, and very smart young guy. And he's quite involved in this thing, is that this whole thing about soil energies and soil energetics and to get more carbon sequestered in the soil and to get carbon out of the atmosphere is, and then also what that does, it makes our soils more resilient and also makes our soils so we can tolerate the bad times. And that's why we don't have any inputs on our farm anymore, because it's the whole system is energy in and energy out. And so this, you can go online and find this article. I think you'll find it, if you've got kind of a science head, you'll find it kind of interesting. There's 2 more articles coming out, but it's a unifying framework for the soil functionality, which means what it really means is soil structure. It should look like that loose chocolate cake like I just showed you. That's really what you're after. That's the framework. Now, what they can do with global positioning, they say that's coming, that they'll be able to measure how much photosynthesis you got going on. It's like a checkbook account. How much you're putting in, how much you're taking out. Every time you till, you're losing some. Every time you haul a crop off, like hay or something, you're losing some. So then what's your balance at the end of the year? So our farming system is, we think it's got quite a positive thing on it, but this soil function then is really, like I said, that aggregate stability, and that gives us our soil resilience. And so I think this is true. It's pretty hard to measure carbon into a soil, because it's, you say, oh, I put a whole bunch in. Well, next year it all breaks down because you put too much air into it or you overdid your nitrogen on it. So it's all kinds of things about that. Yes, you can go to the next one. And so anyway, there's a lot more about this carbon thing then. And so it's hard to measure if they're going to pay people on carbon and carbon sequestering and all these things we want to do with the environment. I think the efficiency and the energy part of it gets to be real as we improve our soils, and we got to quit having stuff run off our land. Everybody says for years, oh, we know how much fertilizer it takes to grow a crop. And then I say, what's that stuff doing down in the Gulf of Mexico? You must not have needed that. How much does it really take? The range of nutrients that farmers use to put on crops is huge. So this is back to my 2 main points. Soil health is the capacity to function. I added the words without intervention. But anyway, it's the organic matter, it's the permeability, it's the structure, it's the biology in the soil. That's what gives it. It's also the mineral balance. Soil fertility is the exchange of nutrients. Just because you buy fertilizer and dump it on the ground, that's the dumbest idea man ever came up with, to put nutrients in solution and then wonder how they got into water. Well, you just put them in solution. What did you think was going to happen? Why don't you hook them to a carbon? Why don't you place them in the carbon biological cycle? So in other words, if I put them on and then locked into some carbon, they can't leach, they can't erode, and as the residues break down, if you want to call that, they become time released. So that has a lot to do with how our nutrients are performed. Next one. So this is soil health, and this is really interesting. Now I've modified it. You got to take that with a grain of salt, but this is your NRCS. This is spot on. I'm speaking next week in Worcester, Ohio at conservation. I've been doing conservation meetings all over this countryside. As the conservation people and the NRCS people, I think they're starting to get this thing figured out. And it's kind of an exciting time. I don't care what word you want to use, regenerative or biological or just soil health, but the capacity to function. And I added the words without intervention. See, if you go to a farm and he says, well, my soils are really functioning, where he's buying insecticides, fungicides, pesticides, putting on all kinds of biotechnology, then that's not be very healthy. You wouldn't have to have all those things. I don't think people grasp the idea. It's true for us. It's true for our soil. It's true for our life. Our organic farm, we've been organic since '94. We have never had a crop failure due to insect or disease problems. We have never seen the need. In fact, now tar spots running all over the countryside on corn. I had crop scouts out there last year, very, very little of it on our farm. Now, some people think it's the copper levels and some, it's the balance and the health. So healthy soils mean they function without intervention. Just like I'm my upper 70s, and if you can say, am I healthy or not healthy? I feel pretty healthy. But if I took 25 pills a day, that wouldn't be, you couldn't tell. So I don't take any, but that's, my wife said, that's my irresponsibility because I won't go to a doctor. So if I don't go to a doctor, I don't know if I need any or not. And I might, So anyway, but I'm functioning without intervention. Now, the other thing, these are spot on, in my opinion, water infiltration. Drive around the countryside next summer after a rain and see how many fields there's water standing in. I got some really incredible photography on this thing. And so water's got to soak in. Otherwise, the soils can't be waterlogged. They got to breathe. They're living live organisms. The nutrients have got to cycle, and that's your cover crops and your plants. You got to cycle through carbon and biology. It doesn't say no-till. It says minimum disturbance. Like I said, I think you got the top couple inches. You can shallow incorporate. The fence post rots off up on top. It's the middle zone. See, the no-till guys taught us you can't plow, dig, and disc every year. The strip-till guys taught us that you want to put a flower pot at every plant. So all land's not suited to be no-till. All land's not suited to be organic. Some land requires intervention, but if I can get a huge root system and then leave those soil roots into the soil and the earthworm channels so the next root can follow those, that's really the secret to soil fertility. So when they compare no-till, I was in Texas, they compared no-till to moldboard plowing, and that's not fair. Why don't you compare it to what I call our system of farming, and one I promote, the shallow incorporating and run big rippers to make sure the water soaks in, and that's pretty minimal disturbance. I mean, here's what corn and beans, or the trouble with no-till on corn and beans is they're not a very big root mass, or there are not many residues with corn stalks, is that crust on top of the ground. Get a no-till magazine out and look for the ads. It's mostly it's machinery ads, the no-till magazine, and vertical tillage machines, airways, things that poke holes in the ground, things that cut slots in the ground to break that crust. It's got to breathe. It's a living live organism. Plant diversity, I already mentioned about that, living roots in the soil. And see, I'm with a group called Rye Revival, because in this part of the country up north here, there's only one crop that we can plant after the corn and beans are harvested, and that's called rye. You can plant rye at Christmas and it still grows. I do it all our gardens, we do it on all our farms, and so I'll talk about our farms a little bit later. And then minerals. If you want to get your soils healthy, what minerals would we really look at? Well, we did NP and K, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, enough. So I'd say calcium, sulfur, phosphorus. Make sure those minerals are high and exchangeable. And how you make sure they're exchangeable is you got to measure the plant. Just because you take a soil test and it says they're in your soil does not mean the plant can get them. And there's where the cover crops and all these other things come in. And then you got to manage the residue decay. So that thing is spot on. If every farmer just laid those things out and make sure I follow those things, we'll have a radical change in agriculture. Next one. So then this is the other thing. This is on our farm right there on Highway 130 by Clyde. That's our dairy farm. We used to be a dairy farm. On the left-hand side, you see we put rye in after corn stalks. In the middle, oats is one of those wonderful crops. Grandpa grew it all the time because it grew on low fertility. Oats has killed more cows than any feed we ever fed them as a forage, not the grain. Oats sucks up nutrients like they're coming in through a straw. So now we put manure on there, and then we plant oats, and the soluble nutrients from the manure are now sucked up into the oats. Not only can I not feed weeds, I got to learn how to manage. I can't let it get too big and all these kind of things. There's a lot of management involved with it. But now I've got my minerals in that oats. And if I see, we feed our soil like you feed a cow. We're dairy people. If you want to get 100 pounds of milk out of a cow, you got to feed a high digestible and succulent feed. When that oats gets about a foot tall, we're going to work it back in the ground because this is probably going to be a soybean crop. I could let it get bigger then, but see, that's the sheet cap is this my kind of a concept about capturing and driving up nutrients out here. So this whole thing gets us to nutrient efficient. You got to remember, this farm no longer puts on any nutrients of any kind. We fix them when we get them, and then we quit putting on fertilizer because we have a biological rotating system and we don't sell much off our land but grain. Next one. So this is another one out here. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. Buckminster Fuller. And I was in, what you're looking at is a bunch of chickens on a free range operation in Australia. They were hungry for what was on my boots. That's why they looked like a billion of them, but they had a big field that they were in. And I say that this is actually spot on, that we have actually already come up with that model. What do you call it? Regenerative or biological or soil health? We have the model out here created that makes the farming system we have obsolete. And that's why every farm maker, the buzzwords in the countryside, regenerative, I don't care what they are. We now recognize that we can fix a lot of the problems we have. And we can fix this excess use of energy. And my excess use of energy, like I said, is all the chemistries and all the nitrogen, all the things we use to grow that crop. It isn't the fuel we burn to plant it or harvest it. And so we have the model. And now we got it, and that's going to make the one we have been following for the last 20 years obsolete. So I kind of like that phrase. You notice I like my phrases to get people to think. Next. So this is on our farm, and I want to talk a little bit about our farming system right now. And what we have on our farming system is that we have 1 year rye. We plant rye. This field here was corn last year, and then in the fall, when the corn is harvested, we plant the rye. And then in the spring, my son's been out here the last 2 days, we frost seed. We spin on clover, a three-way mix. It's sweet clover, red clover, and ladino clover, 3 different kinds of clover. We spin on top of that rye. Now we plant the rye thinner. The rye is only a couple of inches tall right now. Last fall, it didn't grow that well and was hard to get it planted. We had some cold weather in December. It got a little later, in rather November. We don't want to plant it too early, but see then, we harvest the rye, and then all summer we just let these cover crops grow. We just clip them and make sure no weeds go to seed. And so you see little flags up front, then I measured that square foot that you're looking at right in front. And so, anyway, that little square foot of land right out in front of you there is I measured that we get 3 growths that we mow down. We're only doing tillage every 18 months, and we just clip and leave everything lay out here. This all just stays on the ground. Then we shallow incorporate it into the soil as our method kind of a farming, and so then at the end of the season we're putting down about 400 units of nitrogen from what you're looking at. We're putting on about 500 of phosphorus, 900 of potassium, and 1,000 pounds of sugar to feed the soil life and soil bacteria. So now in the springtime, when it's at height, we work it back in the soil because you can feed that feed you're looking at to a cow and get 100 pounds of milk. And we're going to grow a corn crop in here. And so as an organic farmer, like I said, we have no inputs anymore. And so I measure these crops. I've been measuring what we have going on our farm, and it is quite interesting. Next one. There's a couple of guys I thought I had sent and I didn't send. I thought I was going to show a picture of our rye, and our rye was interseeded. So now if you ever drive up past Taliesin and look at the farm, so half of the farm is corn and half of the farm is rye. Now we grow we got about 700 acres of corn and 700 acres of rye. Now I'm with that group Rye Revival because rye is the plant that's here to save the planet. We keep telling everybody. And so I was on the board at Taliesin for 9 years trying to get them to promote agriculture. I want to get Midway restored and use it as an education training center at Taliesin. And I finally got off the board and I wasn't making much progress. And now I finally got approval 3 months ago. We're going to be making a whiskey. I'm not very good at begging for money, but I'm pretty good at earning money. So we're going to make 10 barrels of whiskey this summer with Willisheim. Willisheim is willing to make the whiskey. I'm going to donate the corn and the rye a $70 bottle of whiskey. What do you think the farmer's share is? 50 cents. So I told the guy, don't even send me a bill. I'll give you the rye. I mean, for 50 cents, the cork is more expensive than the rye they use to make the whiskey. Of course, that's why farming isn't really a sustainable system and payment, because the government checks and those all kinds of cheap food, all kinds of other things are added into food. That's so the farmer, whatever, they keep producing the food, I guess, kind of a thing. So, and then so that half our farm is corn, and that corn goes most of it right to Spring Green. And so, the other thing is I've been working in, if you go to Lone Rock, there's Zapatas, they got that, I used to have a flour mill there, and that's now a tortilla place. And Heidi Pitts used to be my neighbor. Her father used to work for me years ago, and I ran before I sold the business. And she went to Mexico, and she married a guy from Mexico, and they were making tortillas on the old style with lye water, the old style Mexican system. Got all the equipment they brought up from Mexico. It's kind of neat. So I took from our farm the rye, and I took a variety of corn that Walter Goldstein, Michael Fields Institute. It's a high nutritious corn, high in amino acids, higher in beta glucans. He's starting to produce. It's 20 years in the breeding process. I say, if we want to feed the world, if you look at what we do, if I make a tortilla with 20% rye and 80% corn, that's the ratios of yields we get on our farm. And it's a zero input farm. I can now feed the world. Our 1,500 acres grows enough rye and corn to make every man, woman, and child in Wisconsin have a quarter-pounder tortilla for 5 days. So just off our little farm, just one little farm. So we want to feed the people of the world. We got to do something different. And this is a total sustainable system with zero kind of inputs onto our system. I said, so we got all these cover crops. We rotate our farm. So if you get up to the Spring Green area, just drive by and take a look at our land and what we do. And we farm a lot of acres. And then I'm also involved up in Spring Green with I'm involved with the Savannah Institute. Actually, my wife's grandnephew, I bought the farm on the south side of the road across from Taliesin. I was on the board and it was going to be sold. The guy was in a nursing home, and I bought it and put conservation easements on it because I tried to get the board to buy it, but it was only on the market for 24 hours. They could never make a decision in 24 hours. I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about. And so I bought the farm. I didn't need another farm, but I put conservation easements on it. And now I'm trying to get it. So we got another dilemma in agriculture. This next generation of children cannot get into farming. My son was the last guy to get in the game. You realize he was 100% debt financed in the 90s, bought land for $1,000 an acre. He's done very well. Now he's had to work really, really hard. Don't get me wrong, but now land is $10,000 an acre. His first tractor was $85,000. Now it's $385,000. So that farm right across the road from Taliesin is the Savannah Institute's involved. We got elderberries, blueberries. I got a packing shed, a greenhouse, a barn. I'm trying to get it so we can generate enough income so the next generation can afford to get in farming. They're not going to grow corn and beans. It have to be some specialized thing. There's 75 acres on the farm. And my wife's grandnephew is that because the elderberries, we got an elderberry nursery he wants to set up, and we're going to put some fruit trees and things in there. And that's why the Savannah Institute, to me, is not only a nice way of sequestering carbon, taking care of land and all those things, but it's an entryway for new people, next generation, to get into farming. Otherwise, there's no hope for them if they don't get into specialty crops. So that's kind of my little soapbox about our farming enterprises in Spring Green. And so this, I think this is my last picture you're looking at, I believe. And what you're seeing there is in 10 years ago, I sold my company for years and years and years. See, it's 40 years ago we started. And so I had three partners. One did sales, one did logistics, and one did the finance. And I did the educating and the training and product development and those kind of things. And so one of my partners passed away and the other two retired. So now what? We built a $35 million company up there, and we got facilities all across the Midwest. And so investors would come and say, can you grow it tenfold? And I said, you got to be kidding. I spent 35 years getting what it is. And then at Utah State University, I ran into this project about making fertilizer on the back of an anaerobic digester. And you see, to me, this is the future in agriculture. And as we speak, so in Fair Oaks, Indiana, that big dairy farm south of Chicago down there, was supposed to be Chicago's airport, Fair Oaks, Indiana. They got tours there. They have a lot of people who ever toured Fair Oaks, Indiana. On that property is a $16 million anaerobic fertilizer facility. They've got anaerobic digestion going on. On the back of the anaerobic digester, then we take the nutrients from the digester, we precipitate the phosphorus out, and see the feed is in the cow for 24 to 48 hours, is in that digester for 3 weeks. And so they get to make a lot of energy. And see, we allowed these big farms to happen. You realize that farm now milks about 30,000 cows, 25 minimum, and they have about 15, 20,000 acres. That's not enough. It takes about 3 acres per cow to get rid of the manure. So every one of those big farms, Dane County, right now there's a project in Marshall, Wisconsin. So the one in Fair Oaks, the one I sold the business, the one they built in Fair Oaks, they went bankrupt. It was way over cost. I said, the first mouse never gets to cheese. We got to be aware, but the product really worked, because now you got all those dead bodies of bugs, you got all those minerals we fed the cows, and now we add other minerals to it and pelletize it and make a fertilizer. And so now that minerals gets moved out of where all these big concentrated farms are. So there's 18 anaerobic digesters being put up over by Kewanee, Wisconsin, and south of De Pere in there. And that's the plan originally, was that there'd be a fertilizer facility on the back. We've got to get those nutrients away. So this is what I sold my business on. This is another thing now. Not only can it generate a lot of electric energy, but we can also make fertilizer here. And we can't haul that liquid fertilizer very far. And if we did, half it would run off into our streams. But why not make it into a carbon-based fertilizer? We've gotten really good results with it, because it's got unique properties. It's a biologic. It's got all those dead bodies of bugs. It's got those extra minerals in it. We got carbon with it. So we made stable fertilizers on the back of that facility. That part was really well done. It's just that we spent way too much money and had a lot of troubles with it. And like I said, the first mouse doesn't get the cheese. And so energy-wise, I think this is a real avenue that's going to go forward. Like I said, the one at Marshall, Wisconsin, Jason Fuller's been doing that. He's got it used to be a CAFO. The building's 100 feet wide, 800 feet long, and he's got a 5-acre composting site. So they take the bedding material from the dairy farms to make aerobic compost, take the liquids from the anaerobic digester to hydrate the compost, and got that in a big lagoon to make this. And then there'll be a pelleting facility put in there eventually. Now, Jason's only been there about a year, so that'll take time. There's another one being done down in Missouri. So I think you're going to see these pop up where big farms are. We're going to make fertilizer and get those nutrients away from those farms back out where it's needed. So that's why this whole system of farming and these whole ideas about energy and getting more efficient and all those kind of things. And I did an economic study on our farm. I'd like to do an energy study to see how we compare to people that do energies out here. And I don't know who's going to look at that. So our system of farming is just not just mine. I work with 4,000 farms at one time. I had that Midwestern BioAg worked with, and I still get out and see a lot of them. So anyway, I see I was going to do a 45-minute talk. I came up pretty good. Now, I do talk a little fast. I'm sure you noticed. And I can't help that. That's the speed I think at. And I tried to slow down and it doesn't work. So anyway, I guess questions.
Oh, that's great, Gary. Thank you so much. Yeah, boy, you must think at I don't know, 100 miles an hour doesn't seem fast enough. That's great.
I do think I said, if I slow down my talking, I forget what I'm going to say. And I tell everybody, I had 4 sisters, and I learned to speak fast because I had to get a word in edgewise. You know how that works.
That's hilarious. I'll say I've got lots of questions for you, and folks, if any of you would have some questions, please go ahead and use that Q&A function at the bottom of the screen.
And
so,
how do
yeah,
am I going to be able to these questions? I might.
Well, as they come in, I'll call them out to you. And here's the first one. So let's speak, if we may, real briefly about the driftless area. So, you know, it's got the unique topography, our unique bedrock geology with a lot of these carbonate rocks that got a lot of calcium in there, relatively thin topsoil compared to some of the more glaciated parts of the Midwest. You know, each of these hills has got these, you know, unique solar exposures depending on what side of the hill you're on. Maybe unique microbes. Anyway, could you tell us what you, and then maybe based on your experiences at your farm and all these farms that you've got, what it might be like an idealized kind of a driftless area farm, and what would that include given the eclectic range of conditions that the geography presents?
Yeah, and I think ideally is what it used to be. It was livestock in rotation and hay. But that's kind of gone, isn't it? And, you know, we went from 32,000 dairy farms when I started my business down to 6. And so now our farming system, now we just turned down some land the other day that needs to be put back into pasture. Now we do the strips. Yeah, we put strips in. All our strips are 90 feet wide because we got 12-row equipment, and that makes those little passes. I can't do what Mr. Wright did there and make all these fancy little curves and ends because we can't farm that way. And then so we have always having protection on the ground and having beautiful soil structure. The water soaks in. I think we can farm that land, and I challenge everybody. I tell people, conservation people say, well, you're organic and you do tillage. And I said, well, we still have strips and we still do the grass waterways. And we do reject some of the real steep land. We don't take on to do that. But our farming, we leave borders around all the streams. We don't do headlands. We leave all the grass waterways. I said, if I'm having water and dirt gullies coming off my farm and running into the stream, then someone needs to stop me. But I don't see that on our farm. But there's a limit to what we can do with that also. Yes, I can improve those soils, but you better have a cover on top. I don't think you can do this growing corn and beans. Way back in the 1970s, you couldn't get a government check if you planted soybeans on over 5% slope. What happened to strip farming? Where did it go? How did this happen?
What might be some of the other kinds of crops that people would grow? I think you mentioned at the farm adjacent to Taliesin. Was that the Hoyer farm you were talking about?
Yes.
What are some of those interesting higher end crops that they're growing?
So I think now with the Savannah Institute, of course, I think they're looking at hazelnuts and chestnuts and fruit trees and those kind of things. But yeah, there'll still be it could be vegetables, and also my son is still going to farm the land. I'm trying to get it so I can sell it to my wife's grandnephew, but he wants to buy it. He's still going to farm the land, but it could also be in the vegetables if you want a higher return. But he's got a job in town, and that's another whole business out here. So I think there's land that's suited for certain practices. Now, our farming system, I think, because we got the rye and the soil building, and it's covering on the ground all the time, and we do real shallow incorporating. We got vertical tillage machines that and once with good soils, I think we're, I don't know, you see, because like now we will not start tilling until the middle of May. So our heavy rains might have been gone by then. And we got a green cover crop growing, and we got a lot of things on top of the ground to protect it. The corn crops come up fast. I think we got a system of farming that give us a little bigger leeway on our hills, but small grains, and everybody's talking about them, but there's no money in small grains. We don't. Someone said, how can you afford to grow rye? You don't make any money on rye. I said, yeah, but we make our money up because we don't spend any money to grow the corn, and we make money on our system. I presented all the economics at the organic conference in La Crosse here a month ago of what that economics would look like. But see, small grains are the thing. So we're going to subsidize something. We got to change how we look at subsidizing and how we're going to feed the world and what kind of crops they would eat. And I realize wheat's not suited for everybody by means, but rye is a pretty miraculous crop and can go a long ways.
Well, yeah. So besides rye, are there some other sort of less conventional green manure crops that you've had success growing in the driftless area?
Yes, and because of how we do things, it could change quite a bit. But see, we're frost seeding clover right now. Clover is a real little seed. It's spinning on top of this frozen ground. And then when my son starts at 2 a.m. and until it gets muddy out there, he can spin it on top of the ground. And the freezing and thawing, the clover is established. Now we plant the rye thinner because we want the clover crop. Now, if we miss that window or something happens and the clover doesn't make it, so then come August, when the rye is harvested, we leave all the straw and everything out there. Now, this would require more tillage and more trips across the field. Now we plant forage oats, we could plant buckwheat, we could pick out certain crops like Sudan grass. If I had a lot of extra weed pressure, I wanted to choke out thistles, I could use Sudan grass. So I can pick crops, the tiller radish, because it puts a big deep taproot down there. I could put mustard in there if I got a nematode problem. I think the research and the end of it's coming, what crop I would choose for what I wanted to accomplish. But see, we don't want to go back in and do more tillage. And that's why we're quite satisfied with the clover and the things we have right now. But if we had issues, everybody says, how you're gonna have issues with your corn every other year corn. And I said, yeah, but it's following all these beautiful cover crops and things, and we've yet to see any problems. But yeah, that isn't what's a new field. That's really this cover crop thing, and what cover crops for a purpose. What purpose are they?
Interesting. Okay, as a follow-up to that, Dina has got a question. You may remember, Gary, I was telling you about an earlier talk as part of the Winter Lyceum, that panel discussion. We had some industry representatives, including the solar industry. And so what they're doing is building some of these solar fields out in formerly agricultural fields. And then in order to so Dina's sort of remembering the part where they say that what they do is they kind of remove the topsoil temporarily, and then they kind of contour the land to make it more optimal for their solar exposure. Okay, then they recontour it with the topsoil, and they're planting some cover crops. They were talking about the company representative was speaking about their hope to select cover crops with a variety of things like sedges or certain plants to help cultivate deep root systems. And we're hoping that that would lead to improved soil health over a long term. Do you have any thoughts or reflections on that?
I would agree with that. Now, we did do alfalfa because alfalfa's got a deep taproot, but we only have it in for the 1 year in alfalfa. So we're only tilling every 18 months. And that 1 year wasn't alfalfa big enough to get a taproot. So we went, I said the tiller radish or sweet clover. We planted yellow blossom sweet clover, which has got a huge big taproot. Now, I suppose you don't want it to get away from you. Are they going to grow all these cover crops to fix the soil? But then is that going to be just habitat for someone, or is that going to look at a food system for somebody? See, I'm really uncomfortable taking beautiful farmland. I was on the planning committee in our township, and we fought hard to make sure that people aren't building houses on beautiful ag land. Why don't they build them up in the woods, or build them on pasture, build them on margin land? Shouldn't solar also go there? I know the one by Lone Rock, that's pretty on-farmable land. Our Tongue brothers didn't give it up because it was wonderful land. It was marginal. And when they, so I don't know. I guess I'm concerned about taking the real good land. Is there a better, maybe solar belongs in everybody's house. Maybe there'll be new technologies coming along. Maybe sheep need to be grazed under. I mean, there's things that probably can be, people will figure out. I think humans are smart enough to get something going.
That's an interesting viewpoint. I heard some economic geologists talk about ore deposits that way. Well, shouldn't you build your housing development somewhere where there aren't big ore deposits? And you should put mines where the ore deposits are. Put your houses over there.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay. Here's another question for you. I seem to remember you. One time I caught up with you briefly. I think you were about to head to, was it South Dakota, and a large, you were consulting for a big company. Was it a big potato farm or something?
No.
What was that?
Mills. That was Gunsmoke, and that was out on Pierce, South Dakota, and that was James Arness, Gunsmoke, Giddy, Festus, Doc. Some of you older people who want to about. But anyway, that was a cattle ranch. It had no darn business being farmed. That's not the one we wanted to buy. I got in the middle of it, and we did all the soil sampling, and we did all the soil tests and all those kind of things, but we never got to manage it because people would throw money into the pot and they'd be hired as the managers. It just got sold out last week, rented out in 4,000 acre or 8,000 acre hunks, and very little of it stayed organic. It never could make that work. They needed to fix the land, and they brought a guy in from Maryland that came for to get 60 inches of rain and sandier soil, and he went, Gunsmoke, that stuff's clay and heavy, and it erodes, and there's no waterways, and there's gully erosion. It's absolutely awful. The plan originally was all the butterfly habitats and waterways. It was really laid out beautiful, and it never got exercised. Only thing that happened is my name got attached to it, that I had something to do with it. I had the plan, but nobody followed it. So General Mills wanted to be a part of it. See, the other thing that they failed, and that's why my rye and my corn thing is, I said, you can't just buy winter wheat. Why don't you buy everything the farm produces? It's got winter wheat, spring wheat, maybe canola. I didn't want to, that's not a corn and soybean farm. So I think they had a pretty good plan, but if you start growing alfalfa hay, Turner's Ranch is next door and they can sell feed to the bison, but now you're exporting things off and giving them to the bison and putting your nutrients on another farm. That's always a challenge. Yeah, we refuse to sell any hay, any straw, anything off our farm. I don't want to remove organic matter. I don't want to remove nutrients. Otherwise, we wouldn't be sustainable.
So the changes that you made to be cash croppers, and you were just speaking a bit on that. For those of us who are not as close to farming as you are, but and don't really understand the transition away from dairying in this part of the world, could you tell us just a little bit about the changes that have led for you and many others to change from dairy farming to other kinds of cash cropping?
So one of the things was the fact that help. Nobody wants to work that hard anymore, and it's really hard to get help. And my son got really burned out. 300 cows, 600 acres, and it was just affecting his health and his attitude. And so my daughter bought him out, and then she dropped it down to 150 cows, and now she's upper 40s, and her son graduated high school, and he didn't want to take over the dairy, and so 20 years ago we sold organic milk off of our farm for $34 a hundred. Today it's 28. And our prices have quadrupled. The economic dairy farms are dropping like flies out. The organic valley is really struggling. We met with the Undersecretary of Agriculture about Pennsylvania. There's no feed. There was a drought out there, and the milk prices are so darn low. I don't know what's going to change or where that's going to go. People don't drink milk like they used to. Whatever the infrastructure costs to get it manufactured is really high. So I know part of the regenerative movement says livestock. But if you think they're going to put livestock in the I states, Illinois, Iowa, and Indiana, you're really wrong. I was at a meeting in Illinois, and a guy, an old farmer, came up and he said, "Oh, I don't even want to go home. It was raining out. It's now January." He said, "I'm feeding them feed out on the old corn stalks. They're sinking in a foot in the mud. I think if you want to put cattle in the wintertime, you better go where it doesn't rain and it freezes in November, maybe North Dakota or Nebraska." I work with a group that puts cattle on land and out there. But so what do livestock add? I don't see. I got livestock under my feet. I need to feed them and take good care of them and give them a diversity of foods. I got a diversity of population. We were organic dairy farming, and we had right along by Clyde there. We had 100 acres of creek bottom pasture, so we grazed it. We feed the cows here, and they took the manure down to the pasture. Now we're going to make hay in that pasture and bring it back and compost. You realize what the nutrient level on the pasture looks like? It wasn't a nutrient management plan to have the cattle. And then they do their things. All the benefit is you got most dairy farms are halfway regenerative and halfway biological to start with because they got forages in rotation. And if they can manage their nutrients properly and not let them all get away from them, they got a fairly good system because they're not tilling and planting just corn beans on every acre. Hay is good, but to sell the hay is tough on the land. You almost got to have the livestock. Now, beef cattle, we didn't get into beef because we don't have good enough fences. Nobody wants to fence anymore. We had beef cattle get out a few years, and the only way we could capture was rifles. We couldn't get them caught around Spring Green. There's no fences. Nobody wants to put a fence up. That's why we got out of cattle altogether.
Okay, let's speak about tortillas again, if we may. So have you ever eaten a tortilla that is 20% rye, 80% corn?
Absolutely. They're absolutely wonderful. Now, Zapatas wouldn't make them for me. And I got Walter Goldstein, the corn breeder. He's in Italy right now. And I saw him at the organic counter. I gave him some. People really like them. That rye gives it a little extra. It's almost like having a little bit of rye in your whiskey. It gives it a little bit of an extra taste. See, wow. Rye is got this medicinal properties. You realize that Denmark, in the country of Denmark, they outlawed antibiotics in their hogs. If they feed 15 or above % rye in the diet, and they've gone up to 80, and the pigs do it, when they get 15% rye in the diet, the need for antibiotics is gone. And so they got some kind of medicinal properties. Now, Latvia, 75% of the bread in Latvia is consumed as rye bread. In this country, it's 0.7%. And so we get more people to eat more rye. That will help make this climate change if I can get a market for this rye. But these tortillas, actually, people really like them. Now, they didn't want to make them in Lone Rock because they want to be a gluten-free operation. Now, rye doesn't have gluten. A lot of people can eat rye and can't eat wheat. But see, I'll be a little political here, not really. I'll say I was over in England, and these guys were out there, and they had the rye. They had wheat in there, and the wheat was only knee high, and they put on 150 units of nitrogen, and we're growing 150 bushel of wheat. And the same group came to my farm, and I had a variety called Orlean that came out of Quebec, and it was supposed to be this wonderful, won baking contests all over. It was 6 feet tall before the storm and went totally flat. The only way, and they stood there and they were just shocked. I said, well, you see, I can't use growth inhibitors because I'm organic. See, rye, we plant a thinner rate, and we plant late because I don't want it to stool out because it gets to, if you get the fertility to grow 200 bushel corn, it's a hard time growing a small grain. Small grains like lower fertility. So we have issues with organic on those kind of things. But the rye out here is a tortilla. I think rye, we got, Odessa will be doing that food thing at Taliesin again this summer. And they did it, that'll be rye centric, and they got rye cookies and rye brownies and rye bread. We work with, Madison Sourdough makes a loaf of bread called Rye Revival. That's the group I'm in. We're trying to get rye revived. And there's Black Rooster Bakery in New York. It's 100% rye bread. You can leave them sit on your counter for 2 weeks and they won't mold. Rye has got some unique properties, but the tortillas taste really good. I have nobody in this. They just try to be honest or just try to be nice to me. They all seem to like them. And Walter really liked them enough, so he wants to meet with Zapatas, and we want to see if we can get this tortilla thing going, because I think we can feed the world with this system of farming, regeneratively, sustainably, whatever you want to call it.
So you were referring to Odessa Piper there, the chef, former Wall restaurant, who's doing that food artisan program at Taliesin Preservation. Yep. So that's on again this summer.
They did it last summer. I think they're doing it again this summer. And of course, we're quite involved with half the farmers rye there at Taliesin. And so we talk a lot about the rye and doing that. So she's on board with our rye revival thing here also.
Okay, well, you bring up Taliesin. So another thing that you've got a kind of unique perspective on, in addition to all that you do, you were selected to be the farming expert who was charged to kind of bring back farming at Taliesin. What could you tell us a few things about what Frank Lloyd Wright's farm was like back in the day, and then what happened to it after he passed away, and what you've got going on there now?
Well, and that is really true. Now, back in the day, I've been working on another book, although I said I wasn't going to write another book, but it's been 7 years already into it. And it's called Farming Taliesin Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow. And I'll get you a copy of what we got done so far. And we go back to Frank Lloyd Wright. I could not find out who his mentors were. Now, his uncles, they were really into farming. But Frank Lloyd Wright, he made the strips because he got driving back in the Dust Bowl, but he also made them to how they looked. He was more into the looks than he was in the actual agronomical properties. Those lilacs I cut out last year, all planted in the shape of musical notes. Now, who would do that? Frank Lloyd Wright. And so anyway, the farming, so I couldn't find out where, they back in the old days, they were always in battle with things, so they didn't have the equipment or the expertise, but he put strip crops in. And so we found out that his uncle, like Richard Lloyd Jones, way back in 1916, he grew 50% higher corn yields than anybody else. And he went through all his methods on this book we've been writing. We've been digging out all this old history around there. So they rotated. They had a lot of small grains. They had potatoes on the other side of the road. They grew all their own food. Taliesin would have never survived without their farming, but I'm not saying they were really good biological farmers. If we go to Lewis Brownfield at Malabar Farms in Ohio, that was a model farm. And that was back in the 40s, and everybody was following that system. That wasn't Frank Lloyd Wright's passion. But then when he died, he got rented out for the next 40 years to the guy to pay the most money and rape it the most. I hate to use those terms, but people don't like to fix rented ground. We got a huge dilemma. 40% of the land is rented. A lot of this land needs liming, and the stuff I just took on there north of Spring Green, the pHs are from 4.4 to 5.2. It needs lime, it needs cover crops, who's going to invest in it? We have $1,000 an acre invested in that land before we sell our first crop, just fixing it. Well, so then when we took over, even Brandock Peters, Frank Lloyd Wright's grandson there, and I got to know him really well, and the architectural students, and when at the school there, they used to come along and say, they said the soil colors seem to be changing. And see, we had that drought in 2012, and we had yield measures of 160 bushel corn on Taliesin. Our county average was 80. And so people really noticed it. So the color is getting darker, but see, we have changed the soils and the resilience. And of course, our farming system is how we do it. So that's my book was Farming Taliesin Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow. So what will tomorrow look like? I think it's a combination of permaculture, agriculture, things that we can, different kind of things. It won't be corn and beans fence row to fence row. And this farm here at Taliesin being organic, we like the system we have now. That doesn't mean it can't advance. And there's certain areas that should be probably taken out and maybe hazelnuts planted, or maybe something else. Elderberries. We need to find some other kind of things on there. So that's what I'd like to see with some of this land. And maybe it should be, we just take some of the land, we just quit farming it altogether because it's too steep, or it's too odd shaped, and it's too little triangles, and it's just not worthy of trying to even beat it up to trying to get a crop out of it. It's better off. It should be doing something besides what we grow.
Sarah says, with your success and enthusiasm, it's hard to imagine you might have any skeptics at all. But are there people who are resistant to your recommendations for biological or regenerative or the soil health kind of farming? And if so, what is the basis of their of the controversy?
Well, I think there is some, because change is really difficult, and for most people, change is really hard. And so we hired a consultant that his father was a soil science professor at Stevens Point. And he was an agronomist for a co-op in eastern Wisconsin. He's been with us 5 years. It was the hardest nut to crack I've ever had. I had an on training. And so he said, I don't know anything. He actually admits that to this day. He said, all I did was go out to the farmer and say, well, how did it go last year? And the farmer said, oh, not bad. When you want to do what you did last year, you want to up it. Now, is that consulting? It's hard to get. We almost have to. That's why that new model has been created. And that's why everybody knows their soils are getting worse. Everybody worried about, farmers don't want to be the problem. They like to be a part of the solution, but they aren't getting much help. So we get a little pushback from the industry. But now the industry is so radically changing. Every company called Corteva and Bayer. I was at a think tank group at Cambridge University over in England, and on a panel, and I got done presenting my farming method, and Mr. Bayer himself, head agronomist, whatever, stood up and said, "That's really nice, Mr. Zimmer, but our farms in England can't afford that." And I turned to him and I said, either they do what I say, or you constantly take all the money they got trying to bail out their problems. The whole crowd cracked up laughing. And at the end, we each had a 5-minute discussion. It should have been taped. He gave the future of Bayer. And it was all what they're doing today, biologicals, and they're going to make money, and they got to figure out how to make money. See, if I went to the fertilizer company, and I did years ago, and I said, you want to work with us? You got to be willing to stand up in front of your farmer and say, we're going to cut your chemicals way down. We're going to drop your insecticide, your biotechnology, and we're going to cut your nitrogen fertilizers in half. And they just sat there. He said, well, how are we going to make a living? And that's the pushback. That's the pushback. See, like our farm, we aren't helping very many fertilizer companies. I can guarantee you that. We got to fix it. We buy raw materials to fix it, like liming and rock phosphate and potassium sulfate and trace metals. But once it's fixed, and now if we sold things off, everybody can't farm the way we do. But see, that's the pushback, is try to get the chains out. Do you realize that the soil science department recommends the same thing they did 75 years ago? NPK, the cheapest sources possible. So it's the conservation people, it's the NRCS, it's the environmentalists. They're the ones that are changing agriculture, not the soil science departments. And it's really hard to change those until they can figure out another way they can make money.
Fascinating. Okay, shifting gears back to the high-end agricultural products, like these produced products. This whiskey. How did you get into to whiskey making at Wallersheim? Tell us more about that.
Well, what happened was that we got our blueberries right down there on Highway 23. I bought that Hoyer farm right across the road, and the pHs were 4.4 to 5 something. It's the third farm I've taken away from the same guy. He's retired now. We just got another one, and he never lined them. And Mr. Warren Hoyer must have never lined it, because everybody else he's lined their land. No farm that you can see has got a 5 pH. So I said I bought a blueberry farm. So we planted the blueberries in there, and one of the neighbors, Joe Stapleton in Wyoming, he's kind of gotten into this thing. It was a really interesting story in the beginning, because we got the watershed district, and he planted a rye crop, and he said, well, that was a $40 an expense I didn't need to carry on. I said, wait a minute. I said, you didn't take advantage of that? You didn't reduce your chemicals? You should see some soil changes. You should be able to. Now he's a real advocate of growing rye as a cover crop, but his brother-in-law lives up by Plain and got blueberries. And he saw my blueberries and he said, oh my gosh, yours are twice as big as mine. They're half as old, and mine are all dying every year, and you don't seem to have any of them dying. So I went up to his place, and he worked with Kramer's, and he got to know the Willersheim. He's friends of the Willersheim. And on his farm, he's got a big whiskey aging shed he built for Willersheim's. And so then he introduced me to Willersheim's, and then I took Taliesin up there. It took me 3 months to get past the lawyers at Taliesin. We got approval to do it. They were worried about lawsuits and everything else. I said, nobody sues a liquor company. They just think it was overconsumption. They don't think it's bad liquor, So anyway, Willersheim's are doing a really good job. They're going to age it. They're going to do it this summer. They're going to age it for 5 years. They're going to do all that stuff at no expense to Taliesin. If Taliesin doesn't have the markets, they'll sell it somewhere else. I think they're willing. It's local, and they seem to really be on board to want to help. It'll make enough money. My 9 years on the board was to get Midway restored. I wanted to get it as a training education center and bring kids out there and redo that land right below the Midway farm as the way it looked in the 1950s when Frank Lloyd Wright was having it. And they had the pork alley down there, and they had the gardens and things. And use a training education center. So all the profit from the whiskey is supposed to go into restoration of Midway. And if I get my 10 barrels is about $250,000 worth of liquor. And so if I can get that kind of money to be into restoration of those buildings every year, I'll have made the most progress I've ever made on that farm to get that thing restored.
Wow. Well, amazing. Well, that's a great project. Congratulations. It sounds like you really worked hard on that board, in addition to all that you're doing to bring some good ideas there. And if you don't mind, Gary, I'd sure love to have you over to the Mining and Rollo Jameson Museum sometime. Take your mind tour, visit the museum. Maybe I can pick your brain as we're looking to revitalize the museum and the exteriors to make all the outdoor areas part of our educational landscape. We currently don't have any agriculture or much conservation represented as part of our land management. We do have an urban pollinator garden that we're proud of, but may I'd love to pick your brain a little more on how what else we might be doing there in our little urban landscape.
Wow, that'd be great. Yes, like I said, I've lived too close. I never really toured it. It's on my list, but I also want to get you that little tape of that book that I've been working on. So I want to get some input as to what I can do to make that thing work. So I'm going to pick your brain too.
I'd love that. That would be great. Well, thank you, Gary, so much for sharing some of your time and your wisdom with us this evening, the museum audience. So glad to meet you. I'm happy to see you. And Gary, if you're available next week, and all of you listening, I hope you'll tune in the same time, 5 p.m. next Sunday, March 26th, for Winter Lyceum 6 of the 7. And architectural designer Ari Georges will be presenting nature patterns, generating creative energy through geometric abstraction in the tradition of Frank Lloyd Wright's Taliesin. So, Gary, thank you again. And thanks to all of you for participating in this program of the Mining and Rollo Jameson Museums. And good night.
All right. Thank you. Good night.